Welcome to the Business of School podcast, brought to you by Cole Connect. Get ready for a journey of topical insights, engaging conversations, and maybe a few aha moments from the business, finance, and technology side of schools. Cole School experts are your host, and with our guests from the world of education, we're about to embark on a learning adventure to support you in the business of your school. Paul is Head of Marketing and Sales at the Alpha School System, TAS, a Brisbane-based software company that develops software for the independent school sector throughout Australia and overseas. Through 4 product lines, TAS provides solutions for all key operating areas, including school management, student management, and educational data analytics. An initiative-driven and experienced leader with over 25 years of expertise across all facets of business, Paul is adept at translating complex business challenges into realistic, achievable solutions and driving execution through high-performance teams. Welcome, Paul, to the Business of School podcast.
Thanks, Kenton. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here in person with you.
Well, it's great that you're actually here with us in the Adelaide office and be able to do this face-to-face. So that's brilliant. Thank you for making the effort to do that. Paul, you have a background of over 20 years consulting with vendors and customers, designing, recommending and deploying in the payable space. We're really looking forward to chatting with you today about the challenges of payables in schools and even missed opportunities. So my first question to you is in regards to what we're seeing going on in the school sector, the transition into the digital world and so much automation going on. We're seeing that well underway with technology solutions in the school sector. What are you hearing about this, particularly from schools that you're interacting with?
Okay, thank you for the question. Look, it's not too dissimilar to what I used to see out in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Huge focus on the technology space. The concept in terms of end-to-end process improvement, all of that is discussed.
Yeah.
But then the outcome that's delivered is essentially a technology stack, and that in its own only delivers you about 45 to 50% of the efficiency and effectiveness gains that you would traditionally expect from a process improvement and automation in the digital world.
No, I get that, because when you hear people thinking about digital and automation, they immediately think about the technology rather than the other factors that need to be considered as part of that process and transformation.
Absolutely. And the focus as they look to implement is around digitising the processes that they currently have, not checking to see whether they're fit for purpose or whether they're digitalising.
Yep.
So that's taking that step back and actually working through what the process should and could look like to streamline it and to take greater efficiencies from the automation.
That sounds very familiar to something we're always saying to clients that are going down a digital transformation journey. Is like, just stop. You don't want to digitalise bad process.
Yep. So what we're seeing and what I'm hearing, and I'm in schools quite often, and I work with a number of our partners as well, Cole being one of them, is what I'm hearing 45% of AP inside the AP is the most manual finance process of anything.
Yeah.
Right. And this is because the focus has been on the technology and not the policy or the procedures.
Yeah. No.
Right.
And I think we can sort of sympathise with that, because as you know, we do a lot of outsourced accounts payable in our finance team, and still finding that so many schools it's about manual printing off invoices, even ones that are electronically sent, printing them off, getting them manually signed, then scanning them back in, getting them in pigeonholes. Pigeonholes still exist in schools. It's crazy. It's mind-boggling.
So that goes to another stat that we've recently uncovered, which is more than 50% of business managers and finance managers have said their AP space is overwhelmed and overworked.
Yeah.
Right, through the continuation of these manual processes, which are in most instances nowadays, because schools, particularly in the independent school space, are large businesses. Those processes cake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we know that from the phone calls we get.
Another area that we see is there's about a third of respondents have said that they really would like to take greater control of budgets and purchase requisitioning and that process, but they haven't got that capability, or they don't have that capacity at the moment. They've always got the capability if they choose to make the change.
Yeah.
But
it's generally around the capacity and the time resource to be able to plan and see through the project to implement it quite often, isn't it?
Well, that's absolutely, and that's called change management.
Yeah.
Right? So everybody goes on about
we need to do what we need to do.
Change management. Change management is absolutely key and important. It's one of the most, most important things in implementing projects, making sure that you get everybody on board.
Yeah.
But what I find in this space is everybody on board is finance manager, the business manager, and a couple other stakeholders. Then there's some training and the technology stack is deployed.
Yeah.
And everybody else is left to fend for themselves.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about maybe this in a little bit later in this episode, is that the change management isn't just about data migration. There's a whole heap of other stuff that needs to be considered as part of that change management process.
So absolutely. So for me, data migration is not change management. Data migration and the technical configuration, that's all part of the implementation of the solution. Right. So if you take it one step back up the stream, right, you should be looking at your processes, you should be looking at your policies, right? You should be aligning those with the new solution. And then change management is all about how you communicate.
It's about
to that
people.
broader group of stakeholders and users, right, to drive adoption of this new platform, right? Because without adoption, it's a waste of investment, isn't it?
No, excellent. I look forward to discussing that more.
Absolutely.
This is really good. And it's amazing that those stats are implying that this is quite common within the school space.
It is. I shared with you just before we came on air about a school we visited last week where they don't have policies and procedures to cover off their payable space, and they would be a $120 million business.
Big operational business.
Absolutely.
So with those stats, and what we're hearing from schools that we talk to, there's obviously a significant improvement and possibility for so much more efficiency gains to be made for schools. So maybe if we try and explore that a little bit more, Paul, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
You've commented that the focus has been on the technology element. However, do you think that in this space there needs to be equal focus on some of those other areas like process, people, and technology? Maybe let's have a look at process first of all. What's your thoughts on the process perspective?
So let's take one step back. I absolutely agree that there are three key elements to any successful change from a technology perspective. Technology in its own right, as we've touched on, doesn't deliver the outcomes. You need to have an equal focus on people, process, and technology.
So you mentioned earlier on that the focus has been on the technology element predominantly. How do you think schools can find balance then and equal focus across some of these other areas that are so important to the process?
Okay, good question. I think if schools, like any business or any finance area, approach it with an equal focus or commitment to people, process, and technology.
Yeah, people, process, technology, yep.
Okay, you need those three elements to deliver a successful outcome. And why I believe that's really important is everybody needs guidance in terms of inside the finance world. So you have the Australian accounting standards, you've got other policies and procedures, right, that finance people follow. And payables is no different. So when you move from one way of doing it to another way of doing it, those policies and procedures need to be updated to reflect the change. That's the process piece that I'm talking about. So that's at a high level. That needs to fold up into the policy area. Okay, and then you fold down into, so then what's the workflow look like? Because your workflow might change as well. And you've got to understand the extent to the payables in terms of what it covers. Because I think sometimes, we take a very narrow view of payables as the outcome. It's just paying Kenton his bill. But in actual fact, you've got to climb right back up the line, and you go, how how do we pay Kenton the bill? So the areas that I'm talking about, purchase requisitions, budget checking, authority,
Yep.
right? Raising a purchase order, getting it signed off, making sure that supplier management is being updated to make sure you've got the right suppliers in.
Yep.
Make sure you've got a good procurement process over the top so you control rogue spending, right? Once it becomes an order, then is it delivered? How's it receipted? How's it then pushed through? How's it approved to pay? All of that whole process, end to end, can be digitized and automated.
Yeah. But you need to consider each of those elements first before you make that step. And we know from talking to the many schools that we do that we're still seeing schools that don't have a purchase order part of their purchase system. They're not having delegation of authority set up. They're not having the right authority levels set up around the school for the different budget holders and different people in that process. All of those different factors need to be really considered, reviewed, mapped out, and then that's the process that is digitalized.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the change piece that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you don't do that...
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if you don't, what are you seeing with schools? What's the effect that they're having when these things aren't considered?
So the effect is, you then rely on people, you trust people in terms of not rogue spending, right? Not misdirecting spending. You trust people in terms of making sure they stay under budget or within their budget allocation. You're making sure, you assume that people will get paid on time. But if there's a paper trail that people have got to go through and they've got to follow you around the school to get approvals, that potentially will delay payment. That'll annoy the supplier.
Yeah. And it's going to annoy the people within the school as well, because we all hear from all schools that are under-resourced, people don't have time, everyone's really busy. And why non-admin or finance teams, like teachers, getting bothered to have to get a bit of paper, print it off, sign it, walk around the school, give it to the next person in line that needs it. And I think the other thing we're seeing within schools, and people probably don't realise how common payment fraud is within these processes in school, and how inefficiencies are having a financial effect too, where we see quite often suppliers that have got big invoices to schools are having duplicate payments made, or we're not checking where these payments are going and checking the bank details. And these things are actually bona fide bank details. These are all massive financial risk effects on the school that all come within this payable process.
Well, absolutely. And some schools, I've seen some schools that are from a capital works program perspective, they'll hold the payment process outside of the traditional AP process within the school. So then you've got...
So remove all the controls and the risk management.
Absolutely. So you've got fraud potential there. You've got rogue spending, which is big in the corporate world, right? You imagine you clip, as an employee, you clip 20 cents, 50 cents off every order that you push through at a line item level, then consolidate. That's how a lot of fraud is done. Right? It takes ages to actually detect it. The other piece of fraud that's coming to the forefront now is actually checking that the organisation that has supplied actually is going that one step beyond just the ABN lookup. So it's to actually look up to make sure that the BSB and the account number are real.
Yeah, that's right.
And that they're registered to that company.
Yeah. And there's technology that can support that. There's applications and softwares that can do that, but you've got to make sure that is within your process to start with. So you've got to find a digitalised solution for that step of the process. Yeah.
So back when I started in Payables a long time ago, none of that was here. So it was a scan, it was a rec, it was an email box that we would download, and you'd scan the relevant points off the invoice, you'd suck that into the system, you'd process that, and then you'd raise your remittance and send it off. Right? But it's now become much more complex in terms of the technology, because it's brought it much closer together.
Yeah.
It's made it much more affordable for everybody in business, particularly schools, and their their ability to invest in solutions like this is limited. So they want to try and leverage the best result that they can off what they implement. But I do think that they would get greater gains if they looked at or reviewed the processes and policies that they had to support their overall solution set. And it's very difficult to retrofit those once you go through. So that's the challenge.
Yeah.
You've got to have somebody strong in the organisation that says, no, we're going to do this. And then off they go.
Yeah.
It's a collective. You've got to have stakeholder management because you're effectively driving that change management to bring you to a new place.
Mm-hmm. So the foundation stone is the policies and the processes. Let's move towards more the change management piece. What about from a people perspective?
So from a people perspective, I've always felt people are the most important thing in anything that we do in business. Okay, they're the biggest asset.
Yep.
They're the biggest area that can create challenge for you. And in this regard, or with respect inside this people, process and technology, people need to be taken on a journey. We need to take their input. We need to explain in simple terms what the change is likely to do for them in a positive way.
Mm.
You've got to get their input early in the process. They've got to they've got to feel that their voice is heard. So collectively, you'll take them on that journey.
They have to be with you on the journey.
Absolutely, they have to be with you on the journey, right? That starts way before, right? And then when you get to the change management, you then revisit that. And you go, this is what we collectively agreed. This is how we're going to move through. These are the areas that this will touch. These are the areas that this will impact.
Mm.
This is the way that we will address this. Here's the training.
Yeah.
Here's the communication. Here's the extra training. Here's your super users through the process.
Super users absolutely critical.
Not just at the technology level.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like they're the project influencers. They're the people that are helping you take those people on the journey. But it's a two-way process as well, isn't it? It's not just a case of the project managers keep communicating with everyone and keeping everyone in the loop of what's going on. There has to be some consultation as well with the stakeholders on your team to understand what their challenges are for them, how these things affect them, so that you can work together on that journey of change.
Yeah, absolutely. And ideally, in an ideal world, there's pre and there's post. So pre the decision, post the decision. Pre the decision, everybody gets involved.
Yeah.
Everybody gets a consultative process. The input's taken. Right. The solution is designed based on the changes in the process and the policies. Right. Then the solution is decided upon. Then the solution is implemented. And that's the post piece. And you take those people from pre that you're using into the post space. Right. And they will become your biggest advocates because they've been part of the solution. Mm. They will own the solution.
Yeah. And they're the sort of terms you want to hear around, as advocates, ownership.
Absolutely.
People looking forward to the change because they're seeing the benefits and they know how it's going to improve what they're having to do for the organisation. So, yeah, absolutely keen. But you can't leapfrog straight from policies and process right through to technology without investing a lot of time and effort in the people.
Well, that's what we should be doing. The reality is,
it's one that's quickly done.
Because
we just want to move straight to getting this
because
implemented.
It's a busy. We're in a busy world. Everybody has time constraints. Everybody has, a certain amount of budget that they've got to allocate, and they've got a certain window that they want things in.
Yep.
Everybody's got pressure from boards.
Yep.
They want to see a return. They want to see efficiency gains, etc., etc.
Yeah. What we found with some of the most effective schools in digitalising a process is they've actually accepted the fact that they don't have the time or the resources to do it properly to what they want to do. So they've actually called out for us to help them with that. So we're either the whole software professional services team are helping them with the project management, or the finance team is actually, right, give us your day-to-day processes for a period of time so that we can do that, and then your team can work through this change management process together. And we find that's the most effective way of implementing anything. You've got to create some capacity for yourself to do it properly.
Absolutely, and that's a great way of doing it.
Yeah. So let's chat about technology then. You said it was an area that most schools focus on first. What are you seeing here from the technology solution side of it?
So look, there are hundreds and hundreds, literally, of technology solutions that fill the AP space.
Yeah.
And look, they all do a job. They all do the job to certain degrees.
Yeah.
And really based on features and functions and how big you want it to be. But I've got a list of key things that I think are really, really important, particularly for the school space. That if you're considering technology, a technology stack in the AP space, I think these are some of the key things that you should look at.
Okay. What are they?
Security. Absolutely got to have security. So security, whether that's security in their platform or whether it's security from an integration perspective, that's something that's really, really important to have. Scalability. So when I talk about scalability, I'm talking about scalability from a horizontal and vertical perspective. So from a horizontal perspective, it needs to scale.
Yeah.
Okay. It needs to be able to grow. It needs to be able to, capacity-wise, it needs to...
Volume-wise.
Throughput, etc., etc. Vertically, it needs to be able to increase its functionality. So, for example, you might start with accounts payable. You then might go to expense management. You then might go to foreign exchange. So these are 3 or 4 or 5 different areas inside the AP space that confront schools on a daily basis. Currently, a lot of the AP solutions only focus on the traditional AP space.
Yeah.
Right? There are some that are now moving into expense management, and down the track they'll also move into foreign exchange.
Yeah.
So they're the key. There's integration into your finance or your school management system is paramount. Ease of integration.
Yeah, because even with some of the solutions we see, their integration's pretty weak. So it can mean that you lose in efficiency because there still was a need for some double entry or reprocessing of documents. So that's an absolute key point.
So I'll give you an example. With one of our partners, we have the ability. They run the AP in their site. We have the ability to take everything that's processed, including the scanned PDF of the invoice, straight through, right? Delegated authorities, all of that can come through, right, into the TAS platform. It sits there. So that's that single point of truth from a finance perspective, which is great. That's the sort of integration I'm talking about, that really tight integration. Workflow aligned to your processes, right? This comes back to, it's almost like I'm on a soapbox. Your processes and your procedures, right, they need to be aligned, right, to the workflow. It's not the other way around. Don't
take a system out the box off the shelf and go, we've got to work the way that says.
So this is a round rod, and I'm trying to put it in a square hole. Yeah. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. You'll get it in, but there'll be gaps everywhere, right? The other area is training and support. So having people trained effectively, having ongoing support is critical, right? Identifying those super users who can then champion the process of adoption so it continues to grow. And adoption for me generally runs for about a 2-year period after you've implemented.
Yes, yeah. Because it's a continual cycle in many ways, isn't it? Of reviewing and working with your stakeholders and your users to ensure that you get the efficiencies that you desired right at the beginning when you created your strategy on the project.
Yep. That's correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's also, we find as well, it's so useful when partners work together to support the schools with the projects. So we've seen that on projects that the Alpha School System and Cole School Experts have done, where the two support teams have worked collaboratively with the school to make sure that the implementations is as effective as possible, and that works well as well.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it's something that as part of the role that I have is the front face of the Alpha School System with our partners, and it's one of the things that I'm really big on. Right, we don't have single point hugs. It's their fault.
Yeah,
we both got to support each other, both pre and post. We spend a lot of time talking, discussing, understanding what the challenge is likely to be with our joint solutions, because we have joint go-to-markets. So it's really, really important that they're almost treated as part of the family. and we get that treatment from them as well.
Mm.
So it's almost like a symbiotic relationship that we have.
Yeah. And just something else off my head that you may see other things that are happening outside of the school sector, other new technologies, new way of doing AP processing that you've heard about or seen that you think will benefit the school system or maybe on the horizon in the not too distant future?
Good question. Look, the technology side is always advancing really, really quickly. But if you take a step back and you understand, right, that particular segment of finance, which you do, right, all it's doing is it's speeding up. So you're OCRing incoming processes. So from an invoicing perspective, that's generally the focus.
Yeah.
If you go upstream, it's the data collection as you step through.
Yeah.
Right, is what you get. So it's the ability to use and contain data in the one place.
Yeah. As well as being able to manage the risks that are always changing in this space too. So, those
risks are huge.
Yeah.
Fraud is up.
Cybersecurity.
All of those things. So we could sit and have another podcast on fraud or cybersecurity. It's just rampant, and it's just a matter of protecting yourself and building layers, if you will, walls within walls to make sure that you have sufficient protection, coverage, but you still have the potential to be exposed.
There's always a risk.
There's always a risk.
So it's just trying to reduce that.
Correct.
And it all goes back again to where we started today, is going back to your process and looking at your policies to ensure that they're as tight as possible, and then the technology is reflecting those controls.
Correct. Processes, policies need to connect with the best technology available at the time so that it's a tight fit, and the people that support the process need to be on board, trained, right, and be able to drive the vehicle, if you will.
No, that's excellent. Couldn't have done a better wrap up myself, Paul. That was brilliant. So, as always, it's an absolute pleasure talking with you, Paul. We could talk about this and other topics forever, but we'll have to have you back on the podcast again. If you're willing, that would be awesome. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks for the invite. Thanks for the kind words, Ken.
Thank you. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Business of School podcast. We've enjoyed the conversation today and would love to have you join us for future episodes. Please hit the subscribe button and follow the links below to find more information and resources to support you and your school team. Until next time, keep being innovative, keep being awesome, and remember, there is always opportunity to improve on the journey. Thanks for connecting.